Today is September 22nd. It's the autumnal equinox and very late in the year to be doing a cutout of honeybees. But I was called because of this tree that had fallen down and is being cut up, and they found a bee colony living in one of the hollow trunks. So they asked me if I would remove it, and so we're going to go ahead and get these bees out of here, at least off this property. And originally my plan was to come and do a cutout, thinking that most of the hive was going to be in this large part of the trunk. But as we get in here, we see there's comb here to the left, but not much comb to the right. So the colony kind of ends right about there. And so I'm going to start cutting into this. I will mention the comb goes all the way through this narrower end, all the way into this end. And we've got bees working down here. And so I might change plans. My original plan is to cut this open, pull the comb, mount it on frames, and put them in a hive, and then take them home and put them in a hive there. But doing that would give these bees little chance to really be able to get things organized and prepared for winter this late in the year. So what I'm thinking about doing is maybe I'll cut this open, see how things are, but I might just end up cutting this off and then just take this whole section home with me, close it up, leave them a small entrance, but just leave the bees in there for the winter. I think they'll be better off that way. So we'll see how it goes, and might change plans as I go along, but that's the thought right now. We'll start cutting into it and see what we have. So it looks like I failed to hit start when I started chainsawing, so you missed all the exciting chainsaw work. But in a nutshell, it looks like I won't be able to take this whole log after all. While the upper part is intact, it looks like the bottom part is just too broken up. So I'm going to have to extract the comb from this. So let's get into it. Because I was planning to remove the comb from that log hive and mount it into frames, I had to prepare some frames in order to do so. The first thing I had to do is remove the wax foundation that was mounted in the frames. These are Layens frames, which has more vertical space than a typical Langstroth frame, and that introduces a little bit of complication. After removing the foundation, I had to remove the wire to get it out of the way. So here I'm clipping the wire and just going to pull that wire out of the frame completely. Now in a typical Langstroth frame, which is only about 9 inches deep, you would put the comb in the frame and then put rubber bands around it vertically or crisscross to hold that comb in place. Because the Layens frames are much deeper than a Langstroth frame, there could be problems with that in keeping that comb stable in that vertical space. Plus, a piece of comb is not typically going to be tall enough, so you would need to stack comb in that frame. What a lot of beekeepers do is put a cross brace in their Layens frame to provide shorter space to put the comb in, and then they use large rubber bands going around the whole thing vertically. I had not planned to do that. I didn't have the large rubber bands. Instead, what I planned to do was to replace the wire with 2 runs of fishing line. And with 2 runs, I could put the comb in between the fishing line and should be able to hold it in place that way. That was my idea. This is not something that I had seen done or had particularly been proven, but it seemed like it should be a fairly good approach to mounting that comb. So here I'm running that fishing line through. I'll run it all the way through one way and then pull a bunch of slack and then run it back through the other way. We will see later on in this video how well that works to mount the comb in that fishing line. And there, we've got monofilament fishing line run in all of these. 2 strands so I can put comb in between, and not too much tension on there, hopefully enough that it'll hold the comb. Now obviously that's not going to be enough if I put just a piece of comb at the top. It's just going to drop right down, but I hope to mount enough comb to help hold it up. And what I can do is, as I put comb in there, I can put one piece at the top, cross the lines, put the second piece underneath, and that will cause some tension in the line as I go along. So hopefully that will work. We'll try the first one. If it works well, then we'll go on and string some more like this. I started out just reaching in and pulling out the comb that I could, trying to be careful not to crush or damage the comb any more than I had to get it out. And as I would pull comb out, I was looking for pieces that would be beneficial to the bees to mount in the frame. At the same time, I was looking it over, trying to make sure if I had the queen that I would get her in my queen clip, because if I were able to find the queen and cage her and put her inside of my bait hive, then that would kind of be game over. The rest of the bees are going to want to follow the queen. I would still need to pull the comb out, but it would be much easier to convince the bees to go into the bait hive. So I'm pulling pieces of comb out, finding pieces that have some good brood on them, finding some that have some nectar or honey in them. And if there's comb that was just empty, just straight comb with no resources, I would tend to avoid that. It wouldn't be as beneficial to the bees. But I'd trim it off, trim the ends to square it up, and so it would fit nicely into the frame. And then I would put it in between the fishing line. Pollen stored up in those cells that I just cut. What I discovered as I was putting the comb into the frame, that the fishing line did a really good job of kind of cutting into the comb and holding on to it. So it was kind of hard to slide it very far through. So instead of trying to slide it through all 4 runs of fishing line, I would just put it in between the 2 middle runs, then turn it sideways and pull the end fishing line around it on each side of the comb. And that seemed to hold pretty well. In fact, you can see as I put that one away, it had enough tension, it was holding that comb at the top, and it wasn't really sliding down. So it did a pretty good job so far. I'd go back and find more comb. Pieces that were kind of oddly shaped or didn't have much resources, I'd set aside. I was really looking for the prime pieces to mount and provide for the bees in the bait hive.
I've gotten about as much of this comb out as I can. This area is clear now, so what I'm going to do is cut off this wood here, and I'm going to cut lengthwise along each side of the longer section, and then just open it up and pull the comb out that way. Hopefully we don't damage the comb too much in opening it up, but there's no other way to get it out really. So, and I want to recover as much of that comb as I can, so these bees will have a fighting chance with as much of the resources as they can take with them.
My strategy here was to take a look and gauge about how thick the walls of that trunk looked to be, and then by sight and by feel I would kind of try to tell how far I was going through the walls of that trunk. I certainly didn't want to shove my chainsaw all the way in and tear up the comb that was inside and hurt the bees, and especially the queen, but I wanted to cut just enough through that I'd be able to pull that trunk apart. So I took a few passes on each side, kind of working my way a little bit each time, kind of feeling the resistance to try to gauge was I all the way through or not, and took my time working through it. Do a little try, see if it's giving yet, take a look and see where I've cut through and where I haven't, and take another pass. I'm cutting at kind of an angle so that that top part would not tend to just slide off. It would instead kind of fit into the bottom half. But because I was cutting through kind of gingerly, it didn't just fall off. I kind of, at the end here, have to pull it apart. This was a very windy day. You could see there my tripod almost blew over. Making a few final cuts, looking to see where I'm through, and I pull the log apart. Now once it was open and I saw how much comb and how many bees there were inside, I started kind of second guessing my strategy.
If there's anything that bees hate, it's the vibration of gas motors, trimmers, lawn mowers, and chainsaws. Well, that and tearing their house apart.
When I first approached this job, it looked to me like the bulk of that comb would be in the larger bottom section of this trunk, the part that was more broken up. And I thought that what went to the top might just be, a couple pieces of comb. Well, once it was open, it was clear that most of this comb was in that top intact section. So I was really, kind of kicking myself for having cut it open, but here we are, and so we'll deal with it best as we can. So now I've made up another frame using the monofilament fishing line, and I'm doing my best to mount comb in here, and suddenly this does not go as well as it did with the first frame. And the biggest problem is that I'm trying to deal with the monofilament line while wearing my gloves, which are at this point starting to get sticky with honey. I didn't want to take my gloves off because the bees at this point were really pretty aggressive with me, then understandably so. Their house is being torn apart, and so they were trying to defend it best they could. But the monofilament line was, number one, just hard to grab and open to get the comb in between. Number two, as I'm working with it and pulling it this way and that, it would tend to break. And so I'm trying to retie it wearing gloves, and that wasn't going well. And so I just kept working on it, and it just wasn't working very well. So as I approach jobs like this in the future, I have a couple things, lessons learned from this one that I would do a little differently. One is if I'm pulling comb out and mounting it into frames, I will follow an approach of using rubber bands. They would be much easier to manage with the gloves on. And I've seen some examples of other beekeepers who will put that horizontal bar in the frame so that the comb is supported by that. Another approach I've thought about is if I had put the comb in vertically, that would really match how it had been in the hive originally, and then I can put rubber bands around it horizontally, and that really should hold all right. So that's one thing I will try. And the other thing is that if I have an intact section of the hive, even if I have to cut a pretty good portion off the bottom, these bees would have had a much better chance if they had just stayed inside of this log. So what I should have done is cut off the portion off the end and sealed up the rest, leaving them an entrance, and just taking it home like that. And then once we get through winter, then I can um, deal with it at that point. Either try to trap them out of the log or cut them out, one or the other. So couple things that I will do differently in the future, but that's part of learning. And we try things, we learn, we do things better in the future. You can see here that I'm actually trying to wrap fishing line around the whole thing and tie it off, and it's just with those gloves on, it is just not working out well. I was getting super frustrated at this point, and I hadn't even brought any large rubber bands with me because I just did not expect to try that. I kind of have a plan B, which you will see in a second, if the monofilament doesn't work, and it clearly is not. I'm just not able to tie it tightly this way. I'm kind of getting at the end of my rope. Since the fishing line is not working, I'm going to a different approach to use the same method I used to mount foundation in these frames. So those sheets of foundation, the way that I mount those on the wire is I will lay them on the wire and then use a pair of jumper cables and a 12-volt deep cycle battery, and will short from one end of the wire to the other, which basically turns the wire into a heater. And so it'll heat up the wire enough that the wax foundation will melt into the wire, or I should say the wire will melt into the wax foundation, and it works really well. I've actually mounted old comb into frames like this for use in bait hives, and that worked all right too. So I'm trying to do the same thing here. So I've removed the foundation from that frame that I just got out. So it has the original wire in it. Taking my jumper cables, I'm going to short across those wires. But I have a problem. These jumper cables I'm using are actually a pretty good quality set of jumper cables, and they're shielded on the ends, so it's hard to short them out. They're really made to only make a connection when you clamp them onto a battery terminal, and I don't really have anything on this frame to clamp onto, so plan B seems to be thwarted. Since the fishing line didn't work, and heating up the wire and melting comb into it didn't work, I'm just going to a very basic approach of removing the comb and putting it in buckets. I'll let the bees kind of clean the honey out of the comb, but otherwise I'm going to try to find the queen, put her in the bait hive, and get the bees to move in there on their own as I clean the comb out of their old hive. So I'm working through here, and this is sped up to 4 times speed, and it's still, you can kind of see how I'm trying to be slow and meticulous, look things over very carefully, watch for the queen, cut out the comb very carefully so as not to hurt any bees, and each piece of comb I pull out, I'm looking over it for the queen, watching for places where bees may be clustered up, which may indicate where the queen might be, and just progressing with that as I remove the comb. But this log, along the sides of this log, there are lots of nooks and crannies where the bees can hide. You can see here I'm pushing smoke into a hole in the end of the log because I found a little gap where I saw a lot of bees tending to congregate. And so I'm trying to get some smoke inside of there and push the bees out, and I'm watching as they come out to see if the queen will flush out of that little space. No luck, at least I did not see her come out. But this was just a process of looking for the queen, removing comb, looking for the queen, looking for the queen on the comb. And it was a long and tedious process, but if I could find that queen, it would make things a whole lot easier. I'm focusing more on that top part that I had taken off of the log because that part had more of the brood comb. The bottom half had a lot more of the honeycomb. And so I would expect to find the queen on the brood comb, so I felt I had a much greater likelihood of finding her there, which is why I focused way more on this part when I was looking for her. I started ripping out some loose sections of the wood inside to open up gaps in the log to try to make it easier to find that queen. And I finally resorted to a process of elimination, you could say. Try to go ahead and get some of the bees into the box, looking for the queen as I go. But as I removed bees from the log, I was hoping that the queen would become more obvious. So just like sweeping up crumbs off your floor, I'd find some bees that were clustered up, sweep them into, this was the top of that swarm trap box, look in the lid for the queen, see if I picked her up, and then dump the bees into the bait hive. finally, not having any luck finding the queen, I went for the Hail Mary, just picked up the log and started sweeping the bees down into the bait hive. I would still kind of watch, but hopefully in this process I would get the queen in there along with the rest of the bees.
So far, the monofilament fishing line in the frames didn't work really great. The biggest downfall is that it's real hard to manipulate when you have gloves on and they get sticky with honey and everything. It's hard to tie good knots and things were coming loose and falling apart. It just was not working well. So plan B there. I tried to use the 12 volt method to kind of melt the comb in. I found out the jumper cables I have with me are a better quality pair than what I use at home. They're better shielded and harder to short across the wire actually. So that was unexpected, but that didn't work. So I'm just going back to try to find the queen and shake out the, get the bees into the box. Haven't found the queen yet. Was pretty sure where she was hiding, but was frustrated. Couldn't find her. So that's irritating, but as of right now, some of the bees are fanning at the box. So after I brushed off bees from half of that log into the box, which is the half I'm pretty sure where the queen was, because that was where more of our brood was, maybe I happened to get her in there. So we'll see if they start moving, and I'm going to keep picking up some of this comb. So now I've got my swarm trap box there, my bait hive, and I think I might have the queen in there. I'm going to keep looking for the queen here, but got these log halves laying here, so hopefully the bees will start marching up. I have seen some bees fanning at the entrance, trying to signal others, so hopefully that will get something started, and even if I didn't get the queen in there, maybe the bees will start migrating in, including the queen. So all the comb is out. There's some small bits I haven't gotten. I may clean that out as I go here. I'm going to be a little while longer, but for now it's just a waiting game, and I'll probably leave things like this until this evening and come back at dusk, pick everything up, and head home.
So now I'm just waiting for the bees to move into the box, and you can see the bucket sitting there. The bucket on the left has honeycomb in it, so you can see how the bees are going after that, cleaning that out and taking that resource with them, and that's good. They will need that to build out the comb inside of the box. And then meanwhile, I had some bees that were still hanging up on some of the pieces of wood I'd pulled out of the log, and so I would shake them off on top of the hive, thinking maybe the queen was there, and you can see how they're migrating to the entrance. And finally, darkness set in, and this is all that's left as I took the box, loaded it up, and headed for home.